Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Apologies, my fault for the timings, but this is recorded, so people who were not able to can catch up later. I'm just going to give a brief intro, so as we normally start with. I'd like to start with pondering on some of the verses of the Quran. So these verses, very popular verses from Surah Al-Isra, which talk about doing good to parents, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and your Lord has decreed to you to worship none but Him and excel in doing, and He has decreed excelling in doing good to both parents. So again, it's walidain, as in both the mother and the father. If either of them or both of them reach old age with you, فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ. So don't even say uff, which is translated as spy, but even in uff, don't even say an uff. وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا, do not scold them. وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا, speak to them using noble words. And then we have the supplication, which is often recited in prayer, and lower to them the wing of humility. وَأَحْفَظْ لَهُمْ جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ وَقُلْ رَبِّ إِرْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. My Lord, have mercy on them, because they raised me when I was small, or when I was a child. So we have this concept of throughout Islamic principle of parents, but also the responsibilities of the child towards the parent, as well as taking care of parents across their ages, so perhaps when they were younger or perhaps when they were older. Now, in terms of this, this is the usual model, which is kind of perpetrated and said, okay, you need to be good to everyone, all family relations. But this does not mean that every family relation is necessarily going to be a good relation, or every family member is going to be a good family member. So the other verse is in Surah Al-Hud. This is Noah. So the verse goes, وَنَادِي نُوحٌ رَبَّهِ, and Noah called to his Lord and said, "Oh my Lord, my son is indeed of my family, and your promise is indeed the truth, and you are the wisest of all judges." But then God responds back. He says, "Qul ya Nuh, innahu laysa min ahlik." Oh Noah, he is not of your family. Innahu amalun ghayrin saleh. He has done an unrighteous deed. So don't ask me about something you do not know. I surely admonish you, at least you be inna takuna min al-jahilin, at least you be one of the ignorant. So in the story of Noah, the son is not saved in the ark. So for example, we have examples where even though he is a prophet, and we can imagine Noah would have had the best of etiquettes in terms of his son, in terms of upbringing, but he also is challenged by his own son, and that his son wasn't righteous, wasn't well. And a lot of the time I tell parents that just because your child has chosen to go a certain way does not necessarily reflect on you as an individual. Sometimes God just tries us with family members which are difficult, or we have the example of Noah and Noah's son. Just a few updates. So we are capacity with our men's circle on Thursdays and Arabic circles. So for the men's circle, there's another circle on Sunday. So if you're they're still open. Also, we're looking for volunteers. If volunteers want to lead a circle, then that'd be really good as well. So we can provide more circles, especially the Arabic circle, I think has, Brother Ahmed has, I don't know how many, 20, I don't know, there's a huge number in there. And I think we could definitely do with a volunteer in the Arabic circle. We recently gave out a feedback. Thank you for the people who've given feedback on our circles. And I promised the Amazon voucher. And so one of you will be getting that Amazon voucher pretty soon. I can also announce we've been trying for about 5 years. We've worked with Brothers Road to bring Journey into Manhood into Muslim country, and alhamdulillah, we've managed that. So 18th to 20th August would be the first of that. I'm really excited. You'd be hearing more of that on the Brothers Road website on how to register and further details. So I know a few parents who are in this webinar at the moment. I can see join our parent circle. This is at Sundays, 8 to 9:30 p.m. And I actually started the parent circle. When I started Strong Support, I never thought I would have a parent circle, because I just thought, parents, what do you mean? It's the clients, it's the people. And how wrong was I? And I can genuinely say I've learned the most from the parent circle than probably the other circles, because struggling and having somebody which you don't have direct control over, because you're not going through the issue yourself, a loved one is really, really difficult. And it really taught me how important it was for the parents to have a safe space, to feel like there was support for this. And it was definitely a population which I didn't consider and I was ignorant of when I started. So I'm very grateful for the circle. I learned a lot from it. And if you're a parent and if you need that type of support, then that is available. We have the 2 webinars after this. We'll have Joseph Nicolosi end of this, and then we'll have Richard Coyne hopefully on 29th. So please watch out for those. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christopher. So Christopher Dahl is LPC, which is licensed professional counselor. He's also a certified clinical trauma professional and a board-approved supervisor in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He is the executive director of the Institute for Healthy Families, which is a nonprofit Judeo-Christian therapeutic organization based in Washington, D.C. He's also the founder and clinical director of Northern Virginia Christian Counseling, specializing in the integration of psychology and theology in counseling. He earned his master's degree in professional counseling from Liberty University, and also holds a bachelor's degree in political science and history from Grove City College. Over 13 or maybe more years of clinical practice, he has created or co-created several retreats, and I'll mention those as well. And the dates of those in terms of break free for inner child work, as well as for parents, key to your child's heart. And also he offers a program for families, which is called Healing the Family. And while he's not doing all of that, he has he's a father to 5 amazing children. So I don't know how he manages that. I'm already struggling with the second one, as you can see. There's a variety of books that he's authored. The one which I've got with me, The War on Psychotherapy, I have recommended it to a number of people. There's so much in there. I think the thing which I really, really liked was the full story of how APA discredits the practice, and it's not really based on science, and the 1971 decision to take it off the DSM, and he goes into depth of what happened, how it happened, and I've never read that before. It's the first time I've read the detail of that, and how unfair and how unjust, and how the activists kind of got the mailing list, and there's so much in there which is absolutely shocking. There's a lot about Sam Brinton in there as well, which for those of you know has now been exposed. So you heard it first. I'm sure Christopher would say you heard it first here in my book. See, I've been telling you all along. There's literally so much in this book, and we've got it as a recommended read on the website, and I do encourage people to read that. It was certainly an eye-opener for me, and I can see that a lot of work was put into getting that together, getting all the information into one piece. And amazingly, it's available on Amazon, right? So it is available. So I do highly encourage you to, if you're new, you don't know what it is, like therapy bans, where it is coming from, the history, I do encourage you to read that book. It's really, really useful. As well, there's other books which is written, as well as War on Psychotherapy. You've got Benefits of Delaying Sexual Debut, which is in the 2nd edition now, and The Meaning of Sex, a New Christian Ethos. And these are available on the IHF, on the website. So there, like I said, Christopher also leads a parenting class, which is available for parents. Again, you can find this on the website, and there are the dates, as you can see, for the retreats. The Break Your Inner Child, which is for men, at the end of May, as you can see the dates. And then there's a Mother's Healing Weekend as well, as well as a Father's Healing Weekend. So again, you can find this information on the website. I really personally like retreats. I think a lot of the times when you're doing one-on-one counseling work, it's a lot to do with the head, and it's not actually experiencing. And even in terms of my journey, I've always seen that retreats and just getting yourself out and giving that time to yourself can be a huge boost in your work. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Christopher.
Oh. Okay, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, I just want to thank you, Ali, and strong support. If I minimize this, am I going to be okay? All right.
Yes.
Still see me? Great. All right, wonderful. I just want to get my screen, full screen here. So you're going to see exactly what I see on my screen, which is the PowerPoint presentation. So again, thank you, Ali, and strong support for a wonderful introduction, and also telling those out here who are joining live, as well as those who may be watching this recording, some of the upcoming programs that we at the Institute for Healthy Families are offering for individuals and parents and families who are struggling with sexual and gender identity. I will take a few minutes of time today to discuss those programs and incorporate that into the presentation here, and to give you an understanding of why we do those programs, and a little bit of the journey that I've taken professionally, but also how my personal journey coming out and healing from same-sex attractions has affected my professional work, both from my my family of origin, but also the 13, 14 years of experience that I have working with families and individuals struggling with same-sex attractions. And I would also put a plug in for those watching to make sure to join for future webinars, Joseph Nicolosi Jr. and also Richard Cohen, both of whom are colleagues of mine and have excellent words to say and are friends and mentors of mine. So with that, let me go ahead and let's go ahead and advance this first slide. The presentation you're hearing today actually is based off an article that was published in a peer-reviewed journal called Issues in Law and Medicine back in 2018.
Sorry, Chris, we're not still seeing the slides, or at least I'm not.
Okay, so you're not seeing the slides. How about now? No? Well, let's see if I can try to, let's see if I can.
You can try and share your screen again. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like I am sharing, but it's
okay.
Let's
see.
how about now?
Yeah, let me just see why it's not letting me. Maybe I don't know if you can stop share and then try and share again. So if you do press stop sharing.
Let's see here. I don't know what happened there, but how about now?
Yes, fantastic.
Okay. All right. I don't know what happened there, but okay. Do you see the full screen again?
Yes, it's lovely.
Okay.
You can see it.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so what I was saying was this article, this presentation is based off an article that was published in Issues in Law and Medicine back in 2018. And the impetus of that was I was speaking at a conference with the American College of Pediatricians on this work, and on also the book that Ali had mentioned, The War on Psychotherapy, when a gentleman from the organization came up and said, "Hey, we know of this peer-reviewed journal that we think this would be a really good article for you to put into it." And so he encouraged me to submit this as an article, and lo and behold, it was published, and so now it's in the literature, which, for those who are familiar with the work that we do, having our work published in scientific peer-reviewed literature is extremely important, because it lends a level of credibility to those of us who are working with clients and families who are struggling with sexual and gender identity. So I was thrilled to have that article published back in 2018. And since then, I'm speaking on this presentation for quite a bit. It's evolved a little bit. And at the end, I'm going to hopefully share you a little bit of video footage from this program that I developed called Healing the Family. And what this program is all about, and you can actually go to the website. I think I might mention it later in the presentation, but the website is healing-the-family.org. And you can find about a 90-second trailer of a real family that underwent this Healing the Family therapy intensive that I do with families who are struggling with sexual and gender identity, with their children who are either LGBT or struggling with these attractions or gender confusion. So I was able to have a family go under camera and record the entire 2-day family therapy intensive that we did. And then I summarized all these key themes that we work on the website, so people can go on and look and see more about what this work is about, and also get a real life view of a family that actually has undergone this. And it's quite remarkable to see some of this footage. I'm going to show you a little bit at the end with whatever time we have left. But if you want to check that out, the website is healing-the-family.org. And I hope to, in the near future, turn this program into a book and maybe a training manual down the line, so that other people can learn, other therapists can get trained in this model of family intensive therapy. And as I'm going to discuss later on, whenever we get to sort of the nuts and the bolts of what it is, it's based on Murray Bowen's family systems therapy. And the interesting thing about family systems therapy was I did not train. My formal education in therapy was not in family, as not as a family therapist. I trained as an individual therapist. But for 5 years, I worked with the International Healing Foundation with Richard Cohen and also Hilda Weeman, who's a colleague of mine. And they introduced me to this family therapy model that I sort of took on and kind of made it my own after about 5 years of working with them. And what I found to be was that family therapy was such an important part of working with individuals who are struggling with sexual and gender identity, mostly young people. Okay. And most of the clients that I work with in family systems therapy and their families are clients in their teenage years, in their 20s, in their late 20s. I've had some clients in their 30s, but usually these clients are centered around their teens and their 20s, where they're still having a significant amount of influence from their families, their father, their mother, maybe extended family. And I found that doing this family intensive therapy, it greatly accelerated and aided the therapeutic process for these clients who are struggling to overcome unwanted same-sex attractions and gender identity conflicts. Along that same thought, I've also found it to be very effective for clients who are simply LGBT identified, who don't necessarily have conflicts with their sexual or gender identity. However, their family may have conflicts with that. And doing this family therapy intensive, I found really increased the communication between the individual, the LGBT identified child, and the parents, the family, and also reduced anxiety among all family members because of this conflict. And I'll go a little bit more into that. Let me kind of step back and just give you a few objectives that I have for our presentation today. Number one, I want to talk a little bit about the outcomes of children and adolescents in mental health treatment, what research shows and what research doesn't show. Number two, we're going to discuss some of the research about mental health treatment for sexual minority youth, particularly raised in religious or what I call rejecting families. Not all the families that we work with are religious, but many of them are rejecting in the sense that they're non-approving of an LGBT identity, and that produces conflicts between them and their children. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the risk and protective factors therein. And then finally, I want you to become a little bit aware of this family systems model that I use to ethically and safely work with families that are struggling with LGBT identified children or children that are just experiencing sexual or gender identity conflicts. And I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit why I do it this way and how I think it's a very safe and effective way to work with young people who are experiencing these conflicts or who are LGBT identified that come from religious or rejecting or non-approving families. So before I do that, I want to go through a little bit of the terminology and key terms. When I say the term sexual minority youth, that's going to reference several populations. For some reason, it's disappearing. This includes youth that experience unwanted same-sex attractions or unwanted SSA, youth that identify as LGBT or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, confused, or youth that experience gender dysphoria, right? The next term is conversion therapy. And if you get an opportunity to read my book that Ali mentioned on the war on psychotherapy, you'll find that the term conversion therapy is simply a made-up term by gay activists to describe any effort, whether it's clinical or non-clinical, all right? And they also describe conversion therapy as simply a client or a person struggling reading a book, right? So it's truly amazing that it's such a huge umbrella term that they've used: a conference, a book, a religious doctrine, right? So for those of you out there that are faithful Muslims, your religion would actually be considered by gay activists to be a form of conversion therapy. If you were trying to have your children adhere to your religious tenets, you're doing conversion therapy on your children. This is how broad they have made this term, okay? And of course, I've worked with Muslims and those of the Islamic faith in the past, as well as Jews and Christians and non-religious individuals. But any attempt to alter or change or heal or resolve unwanted same-sex attractions is considered conversion therapy through these activists. Change therapy is a little bit different than conversion therapy. recently, the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity sort of rebranded this term to be a term called safety or sexual attraction fluidity exploration therapy. Okay, so and really change therapy, just any form of therapy that is open to the idea that a client might experience fluidity or change in their same-sex attractions or gender dysphoria. And then another term I'm gonna reference is religious and rejecting families. And what that simply means is not LGBT non-affirming. It doesn't mean that any family that it disapproves of an LGBT identity or lifestyle rejects the whole person. It just means that they're rejecting that identity or that experience for that child or individual in their family. And then, of course, I mentioned Family Systems Therapy by Murray Bowen. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little about some risk factors for potential harm of sexual minority youth. Now, let me just tell you this. My background, when I was young, I came from a background of having unwanted same-sex attractions. And thank God I was able to come to some healing from those issues, the underlying issues that led to unwanted same-sex attractions in my early 20s, and then go on to live a heterosexual life. I have 5 beautiful children. 3 of them I've conceived naturally, are born natural children. 2 of them are adopted. And I've been working in this area of sexual and gender identity with young people and families and individuals and adults for roughly 13 or 14 years now. And what I've discovered over the last number of years is that there are a number of risk factors that could be potentially harmful for young sexual minority youth and their families. And I've identified that through the research as well as through my own experiential training and my own experience. So I have discovered, because I've worked with hundreds of families, most of my families that come to me and the individuals that come to me are families that are faith, whether they're Islamic, Jewish, or Christian. And I have discovered that quite a few of these families react when their child comes out as LGBT. Quite a few of them, many of them react in very, what I would consider unproductive ways. Okay. And not every family does this, but I would say, in my experience, the majority of families have done at least one of these behaviors when their children have come out as LGBT or even struggling with sexual and gender identity. Oftentimes, I'll see that the family or the parents will pressure the child to attend sort of unwanted religious counseling and or spiritual interventions. And this could range simply from making their child go to church or listening to a religious sermon that's dedicated to sexual gender identity to some really kind of, really harmful stuff, in my opinion, like casting demons out of a child or praying over them to cast demons out or subjecting them to sort of pressure to meet with pastors or religious leaders that may not have a ton of counseling training on these issues. And so oftentimes I've come to work with these children. Usually they're teenagers or young adults, and many of them have gone to a religious counselor or pastor already, and they've usually had a pretty bad experience. And not because that religious counselor or pastor or imam or rabbi had poor intentions or wanted to harm that child, but simply because of a lack of clinical training. And so what they experienced with that religious counselor or pastor was just simply ineffective. And in that sense, it did create harm because they tried to pray. Maybe they went along with a pastor and went through religious tenets and tried to do things that they found maybe spiritually helpful, but emotionally and psychologically not to be helpful. And so they felt harm from that. Sometimes parents will also seek therapeutic interventions to change their child's sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, if it's a child or a teenager that sincerely has a conflict over their sexual or gender identity, this may not be a bad thing. But what I've discovered is that a young person, a child, especially a minor who doesn't really have a whole lot of choice to come to counseling, without the active involvement of mom and dad in the process, the therapeutic process for that child who's struggling with sexual and gender identity can actually be counterproductive. And I'll explain that a little bit when I come to discuss some of the programs that we do at IHF and why we do them. Also, parents often apply different forms of pressure, whether it's emotional pressure in the sense of trying to manipulate a child to do what they want or conform to heteronormative values. Perhaps they might hold financial strings over the child if they need to get therapy or conform to the family's religious or values otherwise, in order to be able to have their college education paid for. And this is all a form of pressure to get that child to comply. And ultimately, it's not very helpful. And then, unfortunately, I have had, not that many, but I have had some experience where a parent has cut off a child or manipulating the relationship to discourage what I call non-heteronormative behaviors, whether it's same-sex attractions or gender identity. Now, that last one is rare, okay? But it does happen. What I have not experienced was any family that submitted their child to any sort of electric shock or convulsive or aversion therapy. I've been doing this work for about 14 years. I've worked with hundreds of individuals and families. I'm also familiar with pretty much all the major practitioners in the United States and some internationally. And I've never, ever met a therapist that encouraged or pursued any sort of aversion therapy for their clients or any sort of client, whether they're adult or a child. And so, as Ali mentioned again, the book that I wrote in 2019 thoroughly debunks these myths of aversion therapy. I've never seen it happen. Certainly, characters like Sam Brinton, who has been in the news lately, have claimed that it's happened. But if you look a little closely in the stories of Sam Brinton and like others like him, you'll find that now even his family, his own sister, came out and was interviewed in the New York Post recently, saying that Sam Brinton's claims of being subjected to so-called conversion therapy are simply not true, that this is someone who is deeply psychologically wounded and disturbed, looking for attention, and he certainly got it. But those claims are not true. I've not found them to be true. I've investigated it thoroughly, and I've interviewed lots and lots of individuals and have done my research. So I can safely say these things don't happen, but the other ones have happened. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit of background as to why I have come to be where I'm at. Having come from a background of unwanted same-sex attractions and experiencing resolution and healing, I felt called by my faith to go into professional counseling to help other people, especially those of faith who were struggling with this issue. And so I finished my studies in 2009, began practicing, as I mentioned, with International Healing Foundation and Richard Cohen for about 5 years. For the first 3 years, I would say that I was really working hard to do my best. But like many inexperienced clinicians, I didn't know what I didn't know, okay? I was new. I didn't have all the training that I probably needed to have, but I had the basic understanding of why same-sex attractions and gender identity formed, and I began to work with individuals who were struggling with that. And as a result, I started working with parents. And what would happen was I would tend to have probably about half a dozen to maybe 10 consultations with parents along with the work that I was doing. And at that time, I would try to give parents some general advice as to how they could bond with their children, especially their LGBT identified child, how they could possibly look at some of the potential causes for why their child was experiencing this issue. And then I was also encouraging the parents to look within themselves to see if they had any unhealed wounds that might be contributing to their child's issues. Usually we can see that this is attachment issues and a lack of bonding between father and son, and sometimes mother and daughter, and then of course family dynamics. So I would do a lot of what I would consider head work with parents. I also at that time was doing a 3-month teleconferencing class with International Healing Foundation. And while it wasn't a bad class, what I found it to be was just ineffective, meaning that it wasn't enough time. What I found is after I did an online class with parents for about 3 months, we barely scratched the surface. It wasn't enough time. And then I also did, with these families, oftentimes some incidental counseling with their children, but not really doing in-depth family therapy. What I found is that especially for the children who were LGBT identified and didn't really have a strong motivation to really resolve unwanted same-sex attractions or gender identity issues, it was mostly surface. They were coming to see me mostly because their parents wanted them to come to counseling. It wasn't self-motivated very much. And in that respect, most of those therapeutic relationships at that time, I don't think were very effective in the sense of helping that client really get to the roots of this issue, which oftentimes have significant family dynamics in their in the causation. Okay. So this is all the kind of the work for the first 3 years of therapy. And I kind of describe this as before conversion therapy bans, because in 2012, the first law was passed in California, SB 1172 in California, banned any sort of conversion therapy for minors. And so I quickly got involved in that movement, not to ban therapy, but to actually advocate for clients and families' rights in order to keep therapy safe and effective and legal for those individuals and families that truly sought it out, not through ways to pressure their children or through coercive methods, right? But those who voluntarily sought therapy out. And so what that allowed me to do and sort of enabled me to do was I took a really hard look at the practices that I was doing and wondering, am I doing anything incorrect in my counseling here? Am I somehow unintentionally causing harm to parents or families or individuals that are struggling with this issue? And what can I do? What is it that I'm going to look inside of me to figure out, am I contributing to this problem of so-called youth being tortured or therapy, or youth being coerced? And, the last thing I wanted to do, coming from the background that I did, was to be a part of the problem. I wanted to be a part of the solution. I went into this work to try to help people. And I was sincerely disturbed by some of the stories that I heard of children being coerced or sent to therapy against their will. So the next part of my practice for almost the last 10 years has been what I consult. I'm sorry, over 10 years now, has been what I do after conversion therapy bans started. Okay. And what I did was I started to have only 1 or 2 consultations with parents. Okay. And I would tell them exactly the type of therapeutic treatment that I offered. I said, if you want me to work with your minor children or dependent children, this is what I require. I want to do a couple consultations with you to understand your family dynamics. I want us to start working towards doing a family therapy intensive, which is usually 1 to 2 days with the entire family, not just the individual with LGBT identified or same-sex attraction, the parents, the children, everybody. Okay. I want mom and dad, I want you to attend these retreats that we have called Key to Your Child's Heart for mothers and fathers. I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. And I want you to engage in a 12-month webinar teleconferencing online class, kind of like we're doing here, except for it's more interactive and it's focused on teaching parents and empowering them to learn about the family dynamics that may be contributing to their son or daughter's unwanted same-sex attractions, gender identity conflicts, or even LGBT identity. Okay. And I changed that class to 12 months because I found that, just as I am with 5 kids and a job and a busy life, I wouldn't have time to do all the work in 3 months. Okay. And so I spread this class out. We meet once a month, and it's a cohort that begins in January. So Ali, I appreciate the plug that you gave for our class. Unfortunately, anyone out there who's listening to this won't be able to join the class until 2024 because we started it in early 2023 and we just closed registration in February. But if you're one of those parents and you're in this for the long haul and you know that your family needs this work, go ahead and contact us and get on our list, and we'll contact you for the next class, because it's a 12-month cohort and we do a lot of intense teaching and studying and processing our what's going on in the family dynamics. And then as I've gotten families engaged in that teleconferencing class, the weekend retreats, the family therapy intensives, what I found was that I ended up working more with the children, teenage sexual minority children, going into deeper issues and having more meaningful relationships with those children, whether they're teenagers or dependents or, early 20s, because what they found out was the work that we were doing in family therapy wasn't about trying to change their sexual identity or their gender identity. It was all about looking at the family dynamics and the wounding, the emotional and psychological wounding that they experience growing up in their families of origin, and not trying to change their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And so what we look at this work as is that a change in sexual attractions or gender identity often is the byproduct, not the goal of the work that we're doing. It doesn't happen for every individual. Some people experience a change in their sexual and gender identity, and some don't. But what I tell parents, and I'm very careful to tell them this, and and also their children, is that despite what happens with your child's sexual or gender identity through this process, you're going to have a better relationship with your child, and you're going to have a better understanding of your own issues and your family's wounds, so that you can be better moms and dads and better families and healthier parents. So doing that, I started to look at, here are some things that we need to stop whenever we're working with families. Okay. The first thing we need to stop immediately, I tell parents, is I want to stop this us versus them approach. Okay. Your child, whether or not they have wanted or unwanted sexual or gender conflicts, okay, whether they're LGBT or they have conflicts with this, okay, your child is not a problem to fix. Your child is a person to love. And we don't want to ally, right, with parents in an attempt to convert or change their sexual minority children from gay to straight. That, in my professional experience, is completely unproductive and counterproductive to the process, right? Because it furthers that us versus them mentality, okay? If there is a situation where you feel like there's an us versus them dynamic, it has far more to do with your child's sexual or gender identity and things that you can't see that are underneath the surface than simply a sexual or gender LGBT identity. And so we have to get to the heart of those issues, okay? At the same time, I don't want to vilify the parents that I'm working with as the quote unquote problem, nor do I want to simply affirm or encourage them to affirm all aspects of their children's sexual or gender identity or their behavior, right? These are dichotomous, black and white type of approaches that we don't want to do, right? One thing that I really appreciate about a clinician that I have great respect for, Dr. Joey Hamilton, is she said this a number of years ago at a conference that she was speaking at. She said, love has room for disagreement. And what we are trying to get with our family therapy models is relational and emotional healing. So in the process, we're promoting emotional relational healing, open and honest communication, and healthy family functioning, as well as promoting therapeutic techniques to reduce anxiety in the family relationships and then promote healthy attachment. So, number 2, we work with parents to focus on their own unresolved emotional problems and unhealthy family dynamics. And what that means is they need to understand their hereditary and intergenerational family problems, their intergenerational family patterns, the psychological factors associated with dysfunctional family dynamics. And this is a lot of work for the parents, because a lot of them come into this situation thinking that their children may be in rebellion, or that their children are simply simply just acting out of their own accord, and they're not influenced by their family system. In my experience, is that's not true. There's lots of family dynamics going on here that's contributing to the problem, and so we have to address those issues. So we have to take the focus off of the child and put it on the entire family. In that process, I'm going to use psychoeducation to help teach healthy communication and boundaries among family members, including a healthy differentiation of self. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later with Murray Bowen's theory. And then we're going to utilize therapeutic techniques to resolve past and present relational conflicts. And then, of course, incorporate information on appropriate models of intimacy, boundaries, healthy expression of love, attachment, bonding, and of course, I'll say it again, healthy boundaries, right? What I find in the families I work with is that there's almost always boundary problems, right? There's almost always some sort of enmeshment going on in the family where we need to kind of figure out and sort through. All right, moving on. I talked a little bit about these therapy retreats, right? It's important, if you're a mom and you're a dad out there and you have a son or daughter who's struggling or is identifying as LGBT, it's important that you do your work, right? Ali mentioned this. We have to do our work. Parents and families, it's not just your child, it's a family issue, right? So we're now in our 10th year of offering these retreats. The Mother's Healing Weekend is coming up April 28th through the 30th. Registration is now open on our website. Our goal is to not have anyone turned away because of financial reasons. So we offer partial scholarships for anyone who's in financial need. And we would love to have you join us for one of these retreats. The Father's Retreat is going to be scheduled sometime in probably late fall 2023. 10 years we've been doing these retreats, and they've been absolutely phenomenal and transformative for mothers and fathers to look deeper into their own unresolved emotional wounding to see how that might be contributing to your children's issues. All right. So we really believe in the concept of the whole family in doing this work. And then, of course, I mentioned this teleconferencing class. Unfortunately, it's already closed for this year, but we would love to have you join next year if you're interested in that. All right. So let me just shift a little bit now to talk a little bit about the research. Some of these slides I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly because we're running a little bit late, but I think we have until 2:30, so we probably have enough time to do all this. And I hope to be able to have just a few minutes of questions and answers at the end. But as far as outcomes of minors and psychotherapy in general, we really don't know a ton, except for we know that 13 to 20% of children in the United States, according to CDC numbers about 10 years ago, that's the latest number we have. We should be getting new numbers soon with that. We know that 13 to 20% of children experience some kind of emotional or mental disorder, and that the annual cost of treatment is somewhere around $247 billion to treat those emotional or mental disorders. But unfortunately, the effectiveness of psychotherapy among adolescents is relatively unknown. And while millions of youth are served each year in community-based mental health care settings, the body of outcome studies has produced really no effect as far as what we consider to be effective, or we really don't know what's effective. Okay. And actually, one study in 2010 found that children and adolescents that went into psychotherapy, after being in therapy for a certain amount of time, they actually became less healthy. Their deterioration rates went from 24 to 14%. So we know that some psychotherapy in adolescence and in childhood can actually be ineffective or even harmful if it's not done correctly and purposefully around what is actually effective. So there has been some meta-analysis done in the last number of years. This is an older one, but it's good data. In this study, White's found that the average minor was better adjusted after treatment than 79% of those who didn't get treatment. But that more often than not, that this study found that behavioral treatments versus non-behavioral treatments, regardless of the client's age, tended to be more effective than any other type of treatment. Shirk also found that, one of the most biggest robust predictors of effectiveness was simply forming a good therapeutic alliance between the child and the therapist. And regardless of the issue, if the therapist and the child had a good working alliance, that more often than not, that there would be an effectiveness in the therapeutic relationship. So we know this across the board, whether it's children, adults, or even the elderly population, that the strongest predictor for effectiveness as a psychotherapist is a strong therapeutic alliance. And what that means, if you don't understand what that means, is simply a good relationship between the therapist and the client. All right. And so that's our most robust predictor of success. All right. Religious and secular versus secular treatment. We know even less, unfortunately. Research indicates that youth that come from rejecting families, they come from backgrounds, but they're more likely to seek religious counseling rather than secular or even integrated faith counseling. And when I say secular counseling, I mean no faith. When I say integrated, I mean integrated with faith and as well as psychological techniques, right? And that's sort of the therapeutic modality of most Christian counselors in the United States. I'll just speak for the United States. Most of us work on an integrated model where we integrate faith and psychology. Lou did an examination with the National Comorbidity Survey and found that a higher proportion of those who sought mental health services in this religious community did so from clergy who have not actually had any formal training in counseling than actually going to a therapist or a general practitioner or psychiatrist. So again, the outcomes are that religious families are more likely to get religious counseling rather than integrated or secular counseling, which can be problematic. So more outcomes from sexual minority youth. There is no published reports in the literature religious or rejecting families that have undergone licensed or therapy for, change therapy. There is none. And these interventions have largely gone underreported. And considering the political efforts to ban these modalities, it's important that we look at these types of efforts to see what kind of merit they have and consider them. All right. So treatment and ethical considerations for sexual minority youth undergoing therapy. Well, while psychotherapy in minors can be effective, right? Working with sexual minority youth definitely adds a variable in a therapeutic setting that brings a host of complex issues. According to the American Psychological Ethics Code, DOP said that clinicians need to be familiar with the development and variation of human sexuality. I'm sorry, this PowerPoint just continues to go back and forth here. So understanding human sexuality and gender, they should also have a detailed understanding of the ethical issues impacting sexual minorities. Also have a competence in gay affirming psychotherapy, which is something that I've had to grow in competence because not all of the clients that I work with want or have a conflict with their sexual or gender identity. Some of them simply are looking for affirmative therapy and they're looking for conflict resolution between their parents. So I've had to develop my competence in gay affirming psychotherapy. As well as clinical skills, of course, for managing suicidal risk, which is always an issue because of that, especially in a population that's experiencing gender dysphoria. There's a high suicidal attempt and ideation rate. And then also, we also know that for those who are same-sex attracted or experience unwanted gender conflicts, for various reasons, sometimes an LGBT identity does not resonate, meaning that they do not accept that. And because of this may lead families to seek therapy or counseling to help their children or their minors or their adult children to resolve these issues, right? So some anecdotal evidence has been placed out there through the research that youth may be pressured, coerced, or forced into so-called conversion therapies. Again, this is complex. We are going to unpack this a little bit. And Young mentioned that 60% of gay-related violence in sexual minority children takes place in the home, meaning that there is often or sometimes psychological, physical, and emotional abuse. However, he found that this was not tied to so-called reparative therapy. And what some of the gay affirming or gay identified researchers are doing with some of the studies I'm going to mention in a couple minutes here is they're often tying bad outcomes of young people, sexual minority youth that come from rejecting families. They're trying to tie those bad outcomes to therapy outcomes and say that a family that rejects their sexual minority youth is akin to conversion therapy, right? So if you so what Young found was that these are not the same thing, right? They're not this. You're not comparing the same thing. Just because a rejecting family is possibly emotionally abusing their child doesn't mean that this is the same thing as conversion therapy, reparative therapy. So we can't consider therapeutic efforts in and of themselves to be abusive. Okay, and so it's important that we make that distinction. Okay, but the LGBT activists will try to kind of put those things together and conflate them, right? If you have a family that rejects a child, this is actually conversion therapy, and that's why it's harmful. And we know that's not true. Okay, so also I have some recommendations for clinicians working in so-called change therapies or safety therapies, right? They should familiarize themselves with ethical guidelines. They should also be aware of how their own heterosexism may have a detrimental effect on their LGBT identified client. And what this basically comes down to is that their assumption that all clients can or should purposefully change or try to change their sexual or gender identity. Okay. That's something that we as clinicians need to be careful that we don't assume this, or that we don't believe that everyone should come from the same value system, right? And want that, right? What we know is that oftentimes doing really good therapy with those who are struggling with these issues will produce healing, and sometimes change in sexual attractions and gender identity can occur, right? But we can't assume that, right? We don't know if that's going to happen. And the research doesn't show that. Okay. So change therapies in sexual photo in adolescence. There's some more research here for you. A study in 2011 surveyed a random sample, found that 38% of counselors believed it was ethical to refer a client unhappy with his or homosexuality to reduce unwanted SSA. However, like I said before, we have no outcome-based studies in the scientific peer-reviewed journal on the actual efficacy of change or safety therapies for minors. We have none. There's not a study out there that has surveyed minors under 18 that have gone through change therapy. So anyone that says that so-called conversion or reparative therapy is harmful for minors does not know what they're talking about, because it's actually not in the research. We don't have it. I would love to be able to have that research, right? But it's very difficult to get that because it's for minors. And there's so many more ethical considerations when you're doing research with minors that we don't have with adults. Plenty of studies out there that show that it's effective with adults, okay? Not minors. However, we do have some sociological and epidemiological data on the validity of same-sex attractions and sexual identity in adolescents, and I'll talk a little about that. A study in 2011 by Ott examined 4 waves at the National Longitudinal of, it's what we call the GUT study, the Growing Up Today longitudinal study for the adolescents. And for those who describe themselves as unsure of their orientation at any point, and later waves of that study, 66% identified as completely heterosexual and never went on to report themselves as a sexual minority in later waves of that study. Okay, so this is epidemiological data, right, from this survey. Okay, we also see a study by Whitehead and Savin Williams and Ream. Okay, 2 of these studies looked at the AdHealth data, which is the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health. And what they found that at each 6, and what this is a very large sample, about 20,000. It might be actually more than 20,000. I think it's at least 20,000 youth, right? Where they look at 4 or 5 waves of data over the course of many years, like 5 or 6 years, they do this study, right? And what they found that at each successive wave of data, the trend lines for those who identified as bisexual or homosexual were becoming less and less bisexual and homosexual and more heterosexual at each successive wave of data. So we know that throughout the course of those waves of data, that young people who were being studied were becoming more heterosexual and less homosexual or bisexual. We don't know if that's because of therapy. We don't know what's going on with those young people. We can't say it's a byproduct of therapy, but we can say that it could just be a developmental byproduct. And we've witnessed this with some of our clients, that simply some clients through experiential methods, right, as they grow up, they get some certain emotional needs met and same-sex attractions resolve, right? We call this spontaneous resolution of same-sex attraction. And it happens, right? We can see this in the data. Okay, so in this, it's important to understand that heterosexuality was found to be a more stable trait. And some studies actually show that heterosexuality, when compared to homosexuality, is something like 20 to 30 times more stable, meaning that those who experience heterosexuality typically stay heterosexual, but those youth that experience homosexuality, that trait is much less stable as they get older into the population, older into their adolescence and into adulthood. Okay. All right. There is therapy restrictions. I talk about this in great detail in my book, right? Legislation was introduced and passed in, I don't even know what it is, dozens of states now, to restrict so-called conversion therapy in minors, right? And while there have been anecdotal reports, we have found these to be very not easily verified. Okay. And some of these are mentioned in the book. I'm not going to go into great detail of these, but there are some legitimate stories of young people that have been harmed by parents forcing them into therapeutic or spiritual interventions. That is definitely not the norm, but the exception. Okay, but it would be wrong of me not to mention that there has been some of these cases, and they're tragic cases. Okay, and you could look more into those names if you'd like to. And there's also some evidence in the literature, like I said just a few minutes ago, about families rejecting their children and that leading to poorer outcomes. But this is not the same thing as therapy, okay? And I'm going to quickly go over 2 studies. The first one, Caitlin Ryan is a lesbian identified researcher, and she is at a University of San Francisco. She has an organization, I think it's a nonprofit, called the Family Acceptance Project. And Caitlin Ryan has authored 2 studies in the past number of years on this experience of young people being rejected from, sexual minority children being rejected from their families of origin, right? Their religious families, okay? The first study was done in 2009. It had a sample of 224 white and Latino LGB youth, right? This is just lesbian, gay, bisexual youth. And this study found that higher levels of family rejection compared to their sexual minority peers who had 0 or no levels of family rejection was associated with poor health outcomes, such as more attempted suicide, higher levels of depression, more illegal drug use, and also more unprotected sexual intercourse, okay? When this study was passed, and later on, this was immediately adopted into the literature of LGBT activists trying to ban conversion therapy. They said, well, this is conversion therapy, right? But if you look at the study and read it, none of these youth actually went through therapy, okay? Or if they did, Caitlin Ryan didn't survey any of their therapeutic experience. So we can't attribute this to therapeutic outcomes at all. No data in the study looked at that at all. Then Ryan, same researcher, released another study in 2018. And this study was a little bit more problematic in that it had 245 self-identified LGBT adolescents, right? However, they weren't minors, they were young adults, okay? And this study was curiously written in the sense that she says, and the researcher says, the adolescents had to have been open about their LGBT status to at least one parent, okay? And with the criteria being that the parent, okay, not the adolescent, initiated some sort of conversion intervention. Okay, the problem with this study was that, well, this was parents who were trying to initiate sexual orientation change efforts and sending them some sort of conversion intervention, okay? And when that happened, they said that the associations of depression, suicide attempts, and less educational attainment, that they were poorer than their peers that didn't have that, okay? There's problems with this study though, okay? And again, like I said, with the previous study, this was quickly adopted into the literature to ban therapy. But there's problems with this study. Number one, the first problem was motivation, okay? We all know that if an adolescent or a minor or a child does not have a motivation to change or resolve unwanted attractions or gender identity, that there's probably going to be negative effects to that if it's more of a parent motivating and not the child. That's not surprising at all. The second problem was that there was a certain vagueness of what the treatment was. And nowhere in the study did Caitlin Ryan or her researchers even describe or define what a conversion intervention was, right? We had no idea whether this was licensed therapy, religious counseling, how much therapy they got, the method, was it shock therapy, was it prayer, was it reading a book, right? What they asked the population was, did someone try to cure, treat, or change your sexual orientation? So broad and so vague, right? We have no idea what that means, okay? And some adolescents reported parental efforts only with professional help, but this excluded children from family events and activities to discourage, deny, or minimize LGBT identify, or using religious or to prevent or change orientation, okay? All right, so the third problem, and Christopher Rossick, who is a researcher and colleague, he wrote about this in an examination of the study of Caitlin Ryan, where he talked about this problem of disentanglement, where the authors failed to disentangle licensed versus non-licensed professionals administering treatment. And he says this, and I'm going to read this to you. Ryan did not disentangle participants' perceptions of the effects of licensed therapists from that of unregulated and unaccountable religious leaders. So therefore, it's impossible to rule out the common sense suspicion that negative effects were an outcome far more attributable to the practices of the latter group. And by limiting their sample to LGBT-identified young adults who self-identified in adolescence and do not report experiencing any sexual orientation fluidity, the sample excludes, by definition, those sexual minorities who may have felt some benefit from religious and professional experiences that could be viewed as non-affirming. Adolescents who may have experienced therapy-assisted meaningful shifts or changes in same-sex attractions or behavior are less likely as adults to self-identify as LGBT and to go to LGBT bars, clubs, service organizations, where participants who were recruited for this research study are more likely to do that. So, as Christopher Rossi correctly said, there is a growing evidence that constructs and conclusions derived from LGBT identified, constructs and conclusions derived from LGBT identified samples may not be easily transferable to non-LGBT identified sexual minorities within primary religious groups. Now, that's a big paragraph to say, and I'll just break it down. What Christopher Rossi is saying is that there's a difference between LGBT identified youth and youth that do not identify as LGBT that struggle with unwanted same-sex attractions and gender identity conflicts. And the latter group, those who do not identify as LGBT, have not been surveyed in this research. And so they didn't disentangle the subjects, and that's problematic. Okay. So I talked a little bit before about risk factors when a child comes from a religious family, right? We often see pressure. They may seek therapeutic interventions to change their child's sexual orientation or gender identity. They may apply other forms of pressure, and they may cut off a child. So we want to get away from that, and we want to look at what are the protective factors that we can look at when we're working with these families. Number one, because of the political climate, right? We want modalities that are legal and effective, okay? We don't want to be working against laws or regulations that are banned, right? And what I've found in the work that I do with LGBT or minorities, sexual minority youth, is that using family systems therapy, right, especially if the LGBT child is not motivated to seek therapy, oftentimes reduces harm and maximizes therapeutic benefit and healing. Especially it's important if you live in a jurisdiction that bans this type of work. Wow, this is really driving me crazy. This keeps on jumping back and forth. So, in my opinion, if you're a competent clinician, there's a number of factors that you're going to work on in this process. You're going to focus therapeutic work on changing and healing the family system, not the child. You're going to work on healing family relationships and working on healthy attachment, promoting growth and emotional processing and emotional intelligence. And then, as Murray Bowen will say, this family systems therapy is focused on reducing anxiety and promoting healthy differentiation of self and healthy boundaries. So family systems therapy examines the historical pattern of emotional functioning and how the family's anxiety levels may be inherited from previous generations. According to Bowen's multi-generational transmission process theory, anxiety levels are transferred to future children that fail to successfully differentiate from the unhealthy relational patterns of their families of origin. What that's saying is, moms and dads, if you have not healed your emotional wounds from your family of origin and you still carry anxiety from your family of origin, that anxiety is going to be transferred onto your children, okay, in various forms. And the multi-generational transmission process theory says that we have to work on reducing the anxiety and helping people differentiate from family members, not detach, but differentiate and form healthy boundaries. Why is it so important and effective, especially for religious and rejecting families? Okay, the goals are treating anxiety and finding relief from its symptoms and increasing each family member's level of differentiation so they may adapt to changes in and outside of the family, different patterns of relating with one another, and experience healthier emotional interactions with one another. It's not focusing on trying to change a young person or a child's sexual or gender identity, all right? There's various forms and ways that we can treat anxiety within the family. And some of those things that we do are we look at hereditary and intergenerational family patterns and analyze psychological factors associated with birth order, sibling dynamics, sibling positions. We look and utilize genograms to look at family history, patterns of emotional and psychological wounding. We together as a family can process traumatic family experiences. It often happens. I had a family recently that was, they came from a country where they had to emigrate because of a war. And that was a big part of the family therapy that we're doing, is helping the family process that, resolving past and present relational conflicts, and then developing appropriate models of emotional intimacy that promote healthy bonding and attachment. Okay. And then, of course, establishing healthy boundaries and healthy differentiation of self. So the general protocol, and I described this a little bit in depth in the research article, a little bit more, is that we typically have 2 consecutive days, 8-hour days of therapy. And it's good that the entire family is present and not just the sexual minority child. If you just have a sexual minority child present for this family therapy intervention, that child is going to think that you're trying to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. It's not going to be effective. So you have to have all the children there, right? Because it's a family issue. It's not a sexual minority child issue. Okay. A multi-generational approach may be used, and I've done this before, especially in families in Central and South America, where the grandmother or grandparents may have been heavily involved in the upbringing of those children. Sometimes grandparents and extended family are invited to join, but often not. In the United States, it doesn't happen. And then, of course, in order to do this, you're going to need to have some advanced training and continuing education in family systems therapy. I hope to be able to do some training on this in the near future, but you can't just get this family together and in a sexual minority youth and just talk and try to conflict resolution. That is not going to be effective. You need to have an effective model to do this. And I'm going to show you just a little bit of what we do. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to show you all some video of this therapy intensive that I did with my clients not too long ago. How do I get out of this? Oh, all right. I want to share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. This is what I want to share. I'm going to share a couple of segments here, and I'm going to try to turn the video volume up. Ali, maybe you can help me on this, but I'll just give you a little bit of background on what this young man is saying. He's sharing that he and his sister, and we call this direct synchronous bonding, right? It's a part of the family therapy where individuals share one-on-one with each other relational conflicts they've experienced over the years. And just as a little background, this client is having a conflict with his sister because the sister has a specific diet adherence, that is, she's rejecting communion, and they're a highly Catholic faith. And so he has a big conflict over this. And this is actually the client that has sexual attractions, same-sex attractions, and he's trying to work out this conflict during family therapy. So I'll go ahead and maximize this, and you can see this on the screen, Ellie?
Yes, I can see it.
Wonderful.
That there was a time in my life where I drifted very far from the church. And the only things that brought me back, because once you pull one thread out of that tapestry, everything else starts to unwind. You make one exception for one thing and everything falls apart around it. The only things that brought me back, and there were two of them, the natural law and the Eucharist. It terrifies me to death that it came down to those two things before I decided I cannot pull the trigger on this. I either leave the entire thing behind or I come back in full. Because that is something you cannot undress and leave, and just leave in part. It is either all or none. And I had to take 3 years of my life giving up things, rounding out edges, and things that I thought I needed. I did my research, and a lot of it was wrong. I had to undo years of my life. I gave up relationships. And even now, the last person I left, the only reason why he can't hate me is because I don't know why, but for some reason, it's almost like he pities me or something, saying that my religion hates me or what have you. And I was like, you don't understand. If you saw what I do in the Eucharist and in the church and in everything she gives me, you would be standing right here with me. I had to take 3 years of my life to destroy everything. Everything. And start over from the beginning. And it terrifies me see that you're not willing to round out the very few edges just to receive that one thing that saved me. I don't want to feed yourself anything or whatever you want to do. You can have the kitchen. It's yours. I'll go and eat out for the rest of my life. But come back to that. Because without it, you and I are nothing.
All right.
It just sort of hurts to see that I had to give up 3 years of my life. And some people are barely willing to give up a smoothie. I mean, I know that these things mean a lot to you, and by all means, keep them. I will not stop you. But for Christ's sake, at least consider that. Because
All right. So I'm going to, you still hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you.
I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit and just show you a little bit a different, more direct synchronous bonding here from earlier on. And you can see I'm facilitating this, right? So you can see me behind. And what we're doing here is each person's sharing, right? They're sharing what's happening inside of them during the important moments of their lives, okay? And what happened in this segment here is what I'm going to show you is that one of the daughters was extremely detached. So I'm just trying to find a specific place I want to start here. One of the daughters was extremely detached from her mother to the point where she did not want to hold her mother's hands and share with her. And so it created a rift and a conflict. So I'm just going to show you kind of what happened. And I won't share the whole clip, but it's pretty dramatic. And this doesn't happen in every family therapy intensive, but in this one it did, where we had to take a little break.
All right. I respect you.
Somebody stepped in the camera there.
Respect you protecting yourself. This is an opportunity for you to break through in a way that you need.
Right.
So I don't want you to hold back except for to stay away from your job. But this is for you. Do it for you. Don't do it for her. Her reaction right now is about her stuff.
Exactly.
And you need to do what you need to do for you to break free from whatever is going on between the two of you. Something.
Right. No, and I completely understand that. It looks like I'm totally put.
And so this is the healthy differentiation of self I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, right? Is that the mother is trying to get her daughter to conform to something within the family the daughter doesn't want to, right? And so we're working on trying to establish boundaries and a healthy differentiation of self. And so there's a big conflict here. So I'm just going to zip a little bit further. I'm going to show you a little bit of the interaction I had to have with the mother and the father after this was because after I talked to the daughter, I went downstairs and the mother, you can hear her weeping because she's so distraught that the daughter doesn't want to actually hold her hands in the therapy. It's very difficult for the mother as she goes through this. So we're talking about healthy boundaries here, right? We're in fast forward. Now I'm going downstairs here. I'm going to talk with mom and dad.
Right.
So I kind of joke about this with families and parents that at least in 50% of the family therapy intensives, someone at some point during the 2 days runs out of the room because they can't handle the deep emotions that come with going on here. It doesn't happen that often, right? But in this circumstance, it certainly did where the mom was very distraught here.
We've been through a long journey, okay? Listen. It's painful. Okay? Breathe. Breathe. Stay with me. Look at my eyes. Okay? Breathe. Breathe. Bring in your safe place, okay? Who can advocate for you right now? The Holy Mother? Okay? Can you imagine her sitting with you? Okay? She's with you. She's holding your hands. Okay? Good. Breathe. Keep breathing. Stay with me. Good. Look at my eyes. You ready? Okay. It's painful. Okay. You went real deep. And this is going to break the cycle. Okay. So that was courageous of you. Your daughters are going to have to share with you from their hearts on what's hurting them. Stay with me. Okay. You look like you've seen a ghost. It's just emotions. Okay. It's just feelings. Not going to kill you. Okay. All right. Keep breathing. No matter what comes out of their mouth, you're going to be okay. You've got your Holy Mother with you. The Lord is with you. Okay. Do you believe that?
Yes.
No matter what, your husband will help you get through it, and you will get through it.
Okay.
But you've got to go through the pain in order to get to the healing. Healing. Okay.
Great.
When we go back upstairs, we'll have the Holy Mother sitting next to you. Okay. Because where you can't handle it, she will be with you. Okay. You ready? You need to spray a little more. Okay. This is what we're here for. We didn't. If they didn't show up and you didn't show up, what would we accomplish, right? Okay. This is what you wanted. Welcome. You're gonna be okay. All right. They shared it's about their pain. It's about their issues.
Right.
Okay. You shared your pain. Now it's their turn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go.
So I love this family. They have major boundary problems, and you can see on the way up, there's evidence of the boundary problems. Watch right here.
Like I said, you guys have empathy, you have nunnery, whatever it is you do, and I.
Okay. Always we do what the client wants.
Okay, so the husband took up a religious artifact to take with the mother to go do the sharing without ever talking to the mother if she wanted to do that, right? Evidence of more boundary problems, right? So I asked the mom, "Do you want that up there?" And she said no. I said, "Okay, let's put it back there. It's not what she wants, right?" So this is just, you know, kind of evidence and testimony, right? A big part of what we're working on here in family systems therapy is working on healthy differentiation of self and boundaries. And it's just a tiny snippet of you know of the program here, but we're getting deep into emotions and family conflicts and deep rooted pain. And you know, if we're not experiencing deep sadness and grief and oftentimes anger and fear, we're not getting to the heart, right? We're not talking about the symptoms, right? The stuff on top, which is same-sex attractions and gender identity issues. We're talking about the emotional wounds within the family, and these are often what, you know, we're having some dynamics there that are influencing some of what's going on with the client, right? Which is usually a teenager or early 20-something man or woman. So I'm going to stop there. I know that we're very short on time. I think we have maybe, I know, almost 10 minutes left. If there's any questions out there that would like to, you know, anyone out there would like to ask a question. I don't know how you want to do that, Ali, but I'm happy to take any questions and hear from anyone out there. And again, thank you for all being here.
No, well, firstly, thank you for that brilliant presentation. And I think, and those videos, seeing the, you can, like you said, you can clearly see the emotions of the work.
Well, and what I do want to just make sure, and you know, just everybody understand, and I just go over this, but you know, after therapy concludes, you know, oftentimes there are going to be conflicts between sexual minority children and families that still persist. Okay, but what we're looking at here is anxiety being reduced and emotional and relational healing occurring, and allowing that room for disagreement, right? Because we're going to have a relationship, but we're not going to agree on everything because after we go through this process, right, it's a huge opportunity for growth and family healing and being able to understand emotion, what's going on with each person. So, and with that, sorry, I will now, anyone who has a question or comment, welcome to kind of chime in there.
Yeah, so we have a question which is saying, is this session recorded? It certainly is. So you can, if you missed on anything, you can catch up on that. You can ask Q&A anonymously, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question via audio. That's possible as well. Just be aware your name will show, and it's live, it's recorded. I really liked what you proposed in terms of it isn't the individual who is the issue, it's the family dynamics. And we've known that, even if you look at the attachment theory, which a lot of work is based on, it's not the individual, it's their attachments and their relationships. And having the advantage of having family members such as the mother and the father is huge, because like you said, SSA is a symptom. It's not the deeper issue. The deeper issue is often interpersonal issues, relational issues.
Right.
With that.
We do have a question here that I'd like to, and I thank you for saying that, Ali. I just see in the chat here, what is your advice for men struggling with SSA who do not have logistical or emotional support to undergo family systems therapy with their own families? And what do you suggest in this case? Great question, right? And there may be individuals out there that, for whatever reason, right? Maybe your family, maybe your mom or your dad or your family's, maybe you're detached from them. Maybe they're deceased. Maybe they're not even alive anymore. Right. And clearly you couldn't do family systems therapy with them. Right. My best recommendation, if you're in that situation, is number one, have a good therapist to help you work through the emotional relational issues that you still have with your parents or your families. But another really helpful thing, and this is what Ali mentioned earlier today, is doing experiential group processing work like Journey into Manhood. I have a retreat coming up called Break Free Your Inner Child. In these types of retreats that we do, oftentimes we do experiential work where we will bring up unresolved conflicts that a client or a person who has unwanted same-sex attractions or gender conflicts has with family members in an experiential process. And so we'll kind of recreate that. It's called psychodrama. And while it's certainly not the same thing as a 2-day family therapy intensive, right? It's something. It's emotional and relational healing that you can get by going back and reprocessing, right, the emotional wounds that may be contributing or conflicting you, right? And that's what we do in family systems therapy. We're simply reprocessing these wounds. Okay, we're doing it relationally with each other, but you can also do this emotionally by having people, stand in place for a mother or father. Even if your mother or father is not able or available to do that, someone can stand in place in this process and do that for you. So attend an experiential healing retreat, whether it's one of mine or a Journey into Manhood. These can be very, very helpful in healing for you. Another anonymous attendee said, would you say healing or therapy cannot take place if both parents aren't willing to take part? Well, no, I don't think that's the case. I think that healing can occur even if both persons aren't willing to take part. But what I will say is that it's going to be harder, okay? Because, most of us grow up in a mother-father family, or we both a mother and a father, and we're both wounded by our mother and our father. But I will ultimately say this, that one parent working to heal the relationship with their child, even with the absence of another parent, can promote healing. And that individual, whether it's the child or whether they're a teenager or early 20s or 30s or even older, right? They can heal those wounds from the other parent, even if that non-willing parent's not participating. I would say it's harder. It's probably may take a longer time to do it, because a willing parent that's participating in the process could definitely accelerate the healing process. But it's not impossible, certainly not impossible. So definitely don't give up hope if you're in that situation and you're frustrated because your partner or your spouse isn't willing to take part in the healing process. All right, I think we have time for one more question. We're going to go to Joanne here, who said, our 36-year-old daughter cut us off more than 12 years ago. Hormones, top surgery, legally changed name. Since adolescence, she has a history of twisting and exaggerating facts very persuasively. Now she's written horribly libelous chapter in a book on trans people. Her anger and fury at her dad is incredible. And yesterday, our older daughter, who's expecting her first grandchild, told us not to call her. She'll call in several more months and years. Well, Joanne, I'm really sorry to hear that. I don't know if there's a question in there, more of that you're going through a really difficult situation here. And what I would, my best feedback and advice for you is, number one, to pray for your daughter. Oftentimes when there is a situation where we can't have contact, whether we cut a child off or the child cuts us off, sometimes we can only pray that there can be an opportunity for reconciliation, and that the Lord or your God works to restore those lines of communication. But I think also in the meantime, there's maybe some things that you can do to continue to improve and become a more emotionally healthy person, so that someday when there is an opportunity for relational healing to occur, emotional healing to occur, you're in a better place to be able to receive your daughter, who is obviously a very, very hurting, hurt, angry person. And so I would just offer you to continue to grow and heal yourself and heal your family and look at your family dynamics, so that whenever there is an opportunity for reconciliation, you're able to listen with your heart and accept them where they're at, accept her where she's at, and receive her pain and try to heal that relationship. All right, final question, then we are going to have to wrap up. What if your child is living LGBT and you want to do therapy as a family? Well, that's totally fine. I work with those families all the time. There's no problem. I mentioned this during my presentation. Probably the majority of families that I work with in family systems therapy has a child that's LGBT identified and doesn't want to change or their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's fine, because in these therapy intensives that we do, rarely does sexual or gender identity actually even come up in conversation, because we're not talking about changing. We're talking about healing the underlying emotional and relational wounds of that person, as well as mom and dad and the whole family. So totally possible, happens all the time. And I've seen great things come out of that situation where there's an LGBT child that doesn't want to change or resolve, but still experiences incredible relational and emotional healing through family systems therapy. So thank you very much for your questions. Ali, I just would like to thank you in strong support for having me here today. I think we do have my information up here on the slide. So if you'd like to contact me for any further support or help, whether it's family therapy or one of our programs, feel free to reach out to me at our website, instituteforhealthyfamilies.org. We have a contact us page. You can reach us. One of my office staff will forward your message to me, and I'm happy to make time to talk with you, to learn more about your family, for you to join us in one of our retreats or our healing opportunities. We're here to serve you and we're here to help you. So please let us know what we can do to help you. Again, it was a pleasure to be with you. It's a great honor and a privilege. And thank you again, Ali, and strong support for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I echo Christopher's experience, as he's led the webinar for me, and I just sit back, and it's brilliant. But no, I want to thank his time, because I know he's busy. He's got a lot, and thank you for your work. And hopefully, if anybody has any questions, wants to get in contact with Christopher, let me know. But thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.